when you're in the day-to-day, you're in the process. As a leader, you have to be able to see the process and have empathy for how it impacts people and understand that it's never going to be perfect. So you have to be able to really see these things at a much higher level, but recognize what's really broken versus what's good enough for right now, and then prioritize accordingly.
Welcome to Productside Stories, the podcast where we reveal the very real and raw lessons learned from product leaders and thinkers all over the world. I'm your host, Rina Alexin, CEO of Productside. Let's dive into today's episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Productside Stories. My name is Rina Alexin. I'm the CEO of Productside and your host today. Today, we will be talking with Brooke Huling, who is the Senior Vice President at Accruent, about product leadership. Specifically, we're going to be covering what you need to be thinking about if you are a new product leader. What are the important things for you to focus on in your first 90 days? Brooke is an expert at this topic. She has been a senior product leader at several organizations, including Dell, Aceable, and now at Accruent. Brooke, thank you so much for joining us today. I like to start by asking everybody who joins us, how did you get into product management to begin with?
Thanks, Rina. I am so happy to be here and nice to meet everyone virtually or otherwise. I have nothing but good things to say about product management. It's been 20 years of blessings and really falling into a career that I was not expecting. I came out of college as an accountant. I thought that was going to be my day job for 40 years until retirement, until 2 years goes by and you realize you're bored, something's just not bringing you joy, and I needed to rethink my path. I was very lucky to end up taking a customer engineering role in a support organization for an accounting software company and was helping fix accounting databases. And from there, was even more lucky to have a leader in that organization recognize that I had some other skills, and they came and tapped me for a product manager role. Started, now almost 20 years ago as an associate product manager and worked my way up into a full product manager, senior product manager. Then you somehow fall into management, whether you are planning for that or not. And it just sort of took off from there. And in that first few years, that person who saw something in me was my mentor as well. So I was very lucky to have a mentor boss, which for those of you who have had that, you know it's magical. And that just inspired me to keep doing what I was doing. And ultimately, my joy pivoted a little bit from writing the requirements and launching the products to ultimately turning and deciding that leadership and growing other amazing product managers was what I wanted to do. So that is how I have ended up now in product leadership, and ultimately have found this career to be extremely rewarding and challenging. And there's a lot of gray hair, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
I love that story, Brooke. You know, I met a lot of different kinds of product managers. Very rare do I hear somebody started out as an accountant and then grew into a product manager. But fantastic story. And you also just hit it. Not everybody ends up on the path that you are on today. Not everybody goes the IC work and then ends up managing others and stepping into product leadership. So thinking about your own career, what do you think makes for a good product leader?
Yeah, I reflect on this a lot because I think the answer changes. There's an element of organization, culture, what products and what markets you serve. And then there's just core leadership principles and best practices. So if I think about my everyday, it's being able to see the forest for the trees. It's building those good, really strong relationships. It's surrounding yourself with amazing people who know what they're doing and are able to really just take it to the next level, recognizing you're not the smartest person in the room. You're not supposed to be. And I spend a lot of time looking for new leadership tools and tactics. And I think that's a big part of any leadership role, really. But when you're in product, all eyes are on you. it's not just your own team, it's the whole company, and it's how you respond to them and react to them and take feedback. It's really just an amazing opportunity, but with that comes a lot of really important, crucial skills that I think you have to constantly be growing and grooming and making sure that you're staying sharp and you're evolving as the rest of the world does.
We've been studying what makes for a great product manager, what makes for a great senior product manager, director, and above. And it's been pretty consistent that the skill sets required for a director or a VP, you need to be really great at strategy and some of the soft skills of managing others. What are the core skills? So if you're thinking about somebody who is, let's say, mid-career and looking to make the switch, what are the skills you think that they should be focused on improving today?
Yeah, I would look at a couple of things. So when I think about product leadership, you're really at the trifecta of a lot of different skills. You're not the product manager anymore. You have to, if you came up through the roots like that, you have to get out of the weeds, and you're not writing stories and all of these things. So you have to be able to mind shift a little bit into this higher level role. And typically that means you're looking after a bigger portfolio, not just one product. Maybe it's multiple. It depends on your structure. So I think about things like strategy. How are you able to think strategically long term? And I think in terms of visuals, right? It's chess, not checkers. So how do you help move the company forward? How do you place a couple of big bets? How do you prioritize investments? It's just a very different way of thinking, but a lot of comparisons to how you are a product manager. You're thinking about which key features to put in first, second, third, now or next. It's really just playing that on a bigger picture, or a higher scale. I also think about process. When you're in the day to day, you're in the process. As a leader, you have to be able to see the process and have empathy for how it impacts people and understand that it's never going to be perfect. So you have to be able to really see these things at a much higher level, but recognize what's really broken versus what's good enough for right now, and then prioritize accordingly. I
Yeah.
also think about relationships too. I would be remiss if I didn't mention those. The higher you climb, the more you lead. You know that relationships are critical at all levels of the organization, and especially in product.
So we're definitely going to cover relationships, but I really like what you said about process. And I think about a product leader, you're unless you are getting promoted within the same company, you're often going to be uh, switching companies. So you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have the first 90 days as a product leader. And thinking about, and you've done this a few times, but thinking about stepping into that role, I think understanding how process works in an organization, it's going to be part of the first things that you're going to have to focus on. And so how do you, let's actually think, you've done a few different switches in your career. How do you know which companies are going to be the right fit for you to join? Let's start there first.
Yeah, as I have kind of mapped out my career, and I firmly believe that we have to really drive our career, that's our responsibility. Somebody else isn't going to call the shots. We really have to think about it. I knew at a very early age that I wanted to see different things, different markets, different companies, different styles. And so, you see the big company, the big process, and you have to recognize that when you get there, it's your job to understand it, not change it. Yes, change will come, but first understand. No matter what the company is or how what the size is of the business, you really have to first understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, who's doing what. And so part of my career growth has been to tackle that initial learning and then ultimate transformation and change management, just depending on what I get myself into. It's inevitably there. In some cases, it's process change. It could be strategy. It could be portfolio. It could be all of the above. But it's really just to first and foremost understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, who's doing what, and to really build up that knowledge base, and then start working with the team on what they would want to change and asking a lot of questions along the way.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to get at is that in most cases, you're going to be at some point in your career joining a new company. and being skilled at just understanding how things are done at that company and mapping that out first before you make any changes. It's going to help you then prioritize how do you get the quickest wins. So,
Yeah.
moving now into, let's say you joined a company. And speaking from your multiple experiences, what do you prioritize on your first day?
Well, I will say there is a bit of a day zero. So I do
Mhm.
believe in having a 90-day plan. I typically have it before I even arrive. It's a good way to reflect on what you've learned at prior organizations. What tools do you have in your tool belt? I see repeating patterns all the time across the various organizations that I've been fortunate enough to be at. You see some of the similar challenges just at a different scale. There's a lot of repeating patterns. So day zero is having that plan. Now, as we all know, as product leaders, plans change, but it's nice to at least have one, and then we iterate. So first day is, foot in the door, understanding who's who. Lady I used to work with would say who's who in the zoo, and it stuck with me. And so you really map that out. You understand who you need to talk to, who do you need to get to know. You put them in priority order. I'll also say there's a risk on that first day. You will have a meeting with someone at some level of the organization who's going to tell you how happy they are to have you. And here are the 35 problems that you now need to go solve. It's just inevitable. That is always someone on the first day, and subsequent days thereafter. I am very careful to just listen and ask questions and not jump to fix mode, because when we come in, that's why we're there ultimately, to bring fix, bring change, all of the things, transform. But that is not your job on day zero. It's probably not even your job in the first 90 days. It's to listen and absorb and build relationships and trust and show an empathetic ear. But it is not to be, as somebody wrote in a book, the advice monster in that first 90 days.
Brooke, I've heard this so many times where a new product leader comes into an organization and they gets everybody's wish list. And that's basically the first 90 days, is trying to understand where do these wish lists come from and who's most important in the company. How do you navigate the discussion around this isn't my job today? You said it's important to listen, but there's probably going to be built up expectations of your role. So how do you marry the two?
I was very fortunate in this last foray at Accruent that they have a process called immersion. Not all companies do it this way, but that actually gave me a bit of a hall pass, if you will, or a green light, to say, hey, I thank you for the feedback. I'm happy to take this under advisement and ask clarifying questions. But to specifically say, as I go through immersion, as I get to know people, I'm not hands on keyboard yet. I'm taking it all in. And typically people are pretty happy about that. And it kind of flips the switch in their brain a little bit, that you're not there right this second to start fixing things, but that you heard them and that you are capturing the list. I think most people just want to be heard ultimately, and recognize that that's what you're there to do for a while.
Okay, so week one, you're probably just listening, like you're saying you are trying to figure out who's who. Within the first 30 days, you probably have at this point met most of the people in the company. How do you prioritize the next 60?
Yeah, there's lots of age-old priority mechanisms, but I'm a very visual person, and a lot of us are. I capture everything and put it into a priority matrix, as all good product managers do too. So I capture urgency, priority, significance, and I really work with my teams and my leaders. I'll sit down with my leadership team and align with them on what they think the priorities are, what really needs to fix or change, and I'll make sure we're communicating that out as well, so that there's a clear plan of exactly what we're going to tackle, what we can't tackle yet. And in a lot of cases, we're going back to basics for that next 60 days, right? We are making sure that our process is sound. We're delivering on commitments. And we may have to retract a few things, right? There's a big roadmap that's been presented for 18 months. Well,
Mhm.
are we delivering on the next 6 months? Let's get that right first. So I focus on the basics, the foundation to set the table. ultimately we then go off and we work on those bigger picture things, but I want to make sure that we're standing on stable ground. And there's a lot of people and a lot of conversations that have to happen to make sure that is the case, especially in larger organizations.
Okay, so let's actually now talk a little bit about process, because I think you've mentioned a different framework, a few different frameworks that you use to help you organize information. You're doing the listening, you're trying to organize it. Is there a common place that you like to start by trying to identify where things may be broken that you might need to fix?
Um, I can't say that there's ever a common starting point because there are so many nuances. If a if an organization is fully on agile, or if they're scrum ball, and I just there's so many different things that you can walk into, and that would influence my priority. But I do try to go through the full life cycle. So I would say starting there and looking at your full product life cycle, understanding what's even in your portfolio. I'm a huge fan of product demos, support ride alongs, sales ride alongs. You will see a lot of things when you do that, digging into the financials, understanding the product P&L. Those kinds of things will give you a really good knowledge base. And I don't think there's ever any one area where I repeatedly see the issues. It truly depends on all of those things, but digging in and recognizing where you need to start and getting a lot of feedback along the way. That's where my leadership team comes into play, because they will help to pinpoint the exact place that we start and then prioritize from there.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought up the leadership team. Those are going to be some of your most important relationships. I don't know how it is at your company, but we have two teams, or each leader has two teams that they think about. One is the leadership team, and one is their department team. How do you start having great relationships on the leadership team level?
I think the biggest thing is starting to build trust. I'm a big believer in the five dysfunctions of a team. It's a great set of tools, questions, team building. It's been out for a while, but I think it's still very relevant. So, trust being that number one building block. It's conversations, listening, understanding what makes them tick, getting to know them personally. Like that's
Mhm.
yeah, that's their world. So I want to know what's keeping them up at night, both work and otherwise. It's really spending time with them. And I will highlight that in our new hybrid virtual fill in the blank world that we now live, it's different. It's harder. It takes longer. Building relationships over a camera is not quite the same. So if FaceTime is possible, great. Go grab coffee, go whiteboard together. If it's not possible, then it just, you have to understand it takes longer, and you have to really ask more questions. And I am a huge fan of active listening, be present, really understand where they're coming from, acknowledge their feelings, their experiences, and build the trust.
I love that you said the five dysfunctions of a team. We review it all the time internally at our company. And one of the things that we like to do is personal histories. And this is true on leadership team level and also in departments. It's so important to get to know your colleagues as people,
Yeah.
learn where they grew up, learn how many siblings they have, because we are more than just boxes on a screen, especially in this remote environment.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Birth order also matters, I will say.
what matters?
Birth order.
Oh man. What are you a older or middle child?
Firstborn. Yep.
Firstborn. Okay, middle child. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so leadership team, getting to know each other as people. What other relationships do you think matter? And I know the answer to this is the all of them, but uh, thinking about you're just stepping in, it's again like putting yourself into the shoes of somebody who's just stepping in their first 30, they're on their 45th day. What are the relationships that you prioritize?
Yeah, I'll start with engineering.
Mhm.
Your engineering counterpart is they're your partner in crime for good, right? You have to be on the same page. You have to trust each other. You have to build the relationship. It's a non-starter if you don't. You cannot afford to have conflict in that relationship. Healthy debate, yes. Hardcore conflict, no. The teams see it, they feel it. It impacts all the way down to the scrum team, the delivery manager, you name it. If that relationship is rocky, it just permeates the rest of the organization on the product and engineering side. So that is my first point of order. Then from there, I would say marketing is on the other side of the equation. They're your left hand, and it's making sure that you're in sync on the same page, thinking about launches and how to make what you're building in product a success. If a tree falls in the woods, who hears it? Well, the same can be said for delivering product capabilities that aren't going to market. So that relationship is critical to unlocking sales and customer growth and other things that will ultimately make the business healthier. From there, I go into other parts of the organization, the sales leaders, the customer support, customer success teams, making sure we have happy, healthy customers and that we in product are doing everything we can to enable those teams, which is a challenge. They have a big job too. They are the front line. They are getting all of the complaints and people don't call customer support to say thank you,
Mhm.
unfortunately. They call for other reasons, and we have to enable them. So those relationships are all mission critical. But I do start with engineering, and then I work my way through. Same thing. It's hard to build those relationships virtually. The more FaceTime, the better. If I can get them together for a brainstorming session or even a normal status update meeting, it's still FaceTime, it's grabbing lunch, and it's really working on connecting.
Okay, so I love the idea about having as much FaceTime as possible with all of these people. And you're right, you really have to go one by one and make sure that they know you, especially as the new leader in place. Because oftentimes product leaders are brought into organizations where something isn't working. As you said, people are not happy with the way product has been done. And I'm curious if you have any advice for product leaders who are in situations where maybe there isn't as much trust built up over the years in what product management can do for other departments. Do you have any advice for how they can navigate those conversations?
You're spot on. Rarely do you come in where it's all pristine and happy and you're inheriting like something on a silver platter.
Mhm.
If that exists, that's amazing, but I've not yet seen it. So I think you can anticipate inheriting rocky relationships. You will inherit the brand of your predecessor. And from what I have seen, the number one thing that you can do to alleviate that is deliver. And I don't just mean product. I mean your commitment, your word. If you have a conversation and then you don't follow up, you don't do what you said, you are just underscoring whatever brand has preceded you. And I think that's where people get into trouble. So you can very quickly change hearts and minds when you deliver effectively and efficiently and you communicate. And in those early days, it's over communicating what you're thinking, what you're planning, why you're thinking the way that you are. Again, asking a lot of questions. If they feel heard, that old adage of weigh in to buy in is alive and well. So they may not love what you're doing, tactically speaking, but if they feel heard, they will be bought in. And if you're delivering your commitments, product or otherwise, I really think people start to rebuild that trust rather quickly. You also have to get to know them as a human as part of that, though.
Yeah, I also like to say, please have patience because you're entering a situation where you don't know all of the context. And it sometimes helps to not just, as you're saying, listen and be empathetic, but also treat them like the experts and just expect to have the same conversation multiple times. I think credibility is built, trust is built. It's something that can be gained again, but it's always harder in a situation where there wasn't trust to begin with. So it's something that you will have to build, and it's a journey to do it. But yeah, you're right. It's impossible to do without having those frank and honest and open conversations. Okay, so you've done this journey a number of times. Uh, any I want to ask, like, any failures or mistakes that you have made along the way that you can share?
Oh gosh, I make mistakes every hour of every day. You name it. the higher you climb, they're just bigger mistakes that take longer to clean up. Um, I will say in the early part of my career, the biggest mistake I made was moving into a management role. And I say management because that was the title. I'm not going to say it was a leadership role. It was a direct manager, 3 direct reports. No
Mhm.
one prepares you for that. No one says, by the way, you need to totally pivot your brain, your joy mechanism, all of it. You're not writing stories anymore. You're not in charge of the features. You now have to operate at a higher level and retool your brain for how that works. And there's no like handbook that's handed to you on that day. And a lot of us, I think, go through a couple of years of thinking we're doing a good job. You think management means telling people what to do. It's the exact opposite. It's them telling you what to do, and it's seeking their feedback and opinions and guiding them and coaching them and letting them fail a little bit and picking them back up and patting them on the back and dusting them off. And you're responsible for someone else's career at the end of the day. No one tells you that. And they don't tell you what leadership classes to take. And there's 5 million books you can read. Where do you start? And you typically find that out a few years down the road, as I did, when you get a really bad 360 and you're
Mm.
just shocked. You're like, wow, I'm really bad at this. How did this happen? Then you get a coach and you work through it, and then you get the tools, and then you stop and think, why didn't I just do that sooner? So I would say that was one of my largest mistakes getting into management, thinking that it was just so easy and how, being a product manager must make you a great manager, right? Wrong, categorically false. And I didn't have someone to kind of shake me and say, no, no, go this way, do these things.
So I think Francis Fry once said, and it stuck with me, that the measure of a leader is if you can remove the leader from their team, does that team fall apart, or does it still function and even potentially function better? A great
Yeah.
leader will have a team that can work well even when they are gone. So, okay, so you brought it up. I'm going to ask, looking at yourself in the past, do you have any advice to give yourself or somebody looking to get a managerial or leadership position? What is one piece of advice that you could share with them today?
I wish I had figured out sooner to start growing that leadership toolbox and realizing that I had to invest in myself, that the company may or may not invest, and their training program may or may not cover those things. Recognizing that it is up to us as leaders, that it's not part of the company you're at or even your title. It's on you to go and find those things and ask for a 360 or pay for one yourself, and to keep growing and honing those skills. If I had done that sooner, I know there are several people who I would have been a better leader for. And I probably could have helped them more and inspired them more. And there would have been, better output within the product team if I had focused on those things earlier on. Now, ultimately, I figured it out. And I think most people do. But what would have life been like if I had fast tracked that? And I would definitely do that over again if I could, but I'm thankful for the bruises along the way because those also help us to mature.
I love that, Brooke. I think sometimes when I ask for feedback, sometimes I don't get it straight. And so I have to tell people, okay, that thought that you just had when I asked for feedback that you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't share with you. That's what I want to hear because that's what's going to get me, up to my next level and make me better. But it's not always the case with 360 feedback that you're able to get that. So I love the idea of hiring somebody else to do it because people are often much more or feel much more safe in providing that feedback directly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. How can people find you after this podcast?
Yeah, I would love that. For anybody watching, you can find me on LinkedIn. I am typically checking messages at least once a week. Shoot me a note. I would love to meet people virtually or otherwise. And I'm happy to have a conversation to further this discussion.
Thank you, Brooke, and thanks for joining us. Next week, everyone, please join us for another episode of Productside Stories, the podcast where we get to interview folks like Brooke Huling and bring the very real and raw lessons learned from product leaders and thinkers all over the world. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for tuning into Productside Stories. I hope today's insights inspire you and propel your product journey forward. Remember, every challenge is a lesson waiting to be learned. And you can also visit us at productside.com for more free resources like webinars, templates, playbooks, and other product wisdom repackaged for you. I'm Rina Alexin, and until next time, keep innovating, keep leading, and keep creating stories worth sharing.